Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adam Crawford. I'm the co-director of the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre, and it's my great pleasure to chair today's webinar on the subject of policing, climate vulnerabilities, and pathways of resilience. My role this afternoon is just to introduce the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre and the speakers, keep them to time, and then facilitate the question and answer or discussion at the end. I should say that colleagues should post questions in the Q&A function. We won't be using the chat, we'll just be using the Q&A function. So do think of questions, post those, and we'll put those to the speakers when we get to the question and answer session towards the end. And today we've got two wonderful speakers, two great speakers who are going to provide insights from their research around the subject of policing climate vulnerability and pathways to resilience. But before I introduce them, let me just say something very briefly by way of really kind of about the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. We're a centre based at the University of Leeds and the University of York, but which co-investigators across the UK and beyond, looking at a whole range of areas of work across vulnerability and policing, and very keen to be supporting work around the climate vulnerabilities and the way in which climate change is impacting upon existing vulnerabilities, but also shaping and determining new vulnerabilities. Just by way of information about some other things that may be of interest to colleagues. Nathan, can you move to the next slide, please? So first of all, we will be hosting another webinar, up and coming webinar. We have a webinar series, and the next our series will be drawing from our domestic abuse project, which has an international dimension. And that webinar will be focused on responding to domestic abuse, lessons from Greater Manchester and Victoria, Australia. And that will be midday UK time on Tuesday, the 9th of December. So do join us for that. And then further in the future, just to highlight that the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre will be hosting, along with the Global Law Enforcement and Public Health Association, the Law Enforcement and Public Health Conference in Leeds, in the UK, on the 6th to the 9th of September. I believe that later today we will be advertising the call for papers for that. So again, do visit the website from the centre that Nathan will be posting in the chat function. So do keep an eye on that. And you can scan the QR code there and find out more. There's dedicated web pages. Okay, enough by the way of advertisement in the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. We're here really to hear from two excellent speakers. First of all, my colleague, Dr. Ali Malik, who's going to speak to the title Policing Climate Vulnerabilities and Pathways of Resilience. Ali is a lecturer in criminal justice at the School of Law at the University of Leeds. He was also a beneficiary, and I think he might talk about this, was of our early career researcher grant from the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. Ali also has been obviously over a long period of time working around police governance and the impacts of climate change and upon that. He has just joined myself and some other colleagues as one of the leadership team on the Yorkshire Policing Academic Centre for Excellence, and Ali is leading the climate crisis theme within that. So I'm sure we'll hear more in due course. But today we've not just got one, we've got two speakers. So Dr. Anna Matczak will, from the Hague University Applied Sciences, will provide our second presentation on the title of Adapting to Climate Change in Modern Policing, the Rise of the Eco-Cop. Anna is a senior lecturer at the Hague University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. She has also been a visiting fellow of the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. She did a PhD at the London School of Economics. And most recently, and I think we're going to hear about this in due course, she's the author of a book, Adapting to Climate Change in Modern Policing, The Rise of the Eurocop, from which we will hear more. So enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Ali, and Ali's going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll move on to Anna's presentation, and then we'll provide some time at the end to address questions. Do keep those questions coming in the Q&A function, and we'll keep an eye out on those and present those to the speakers when we get to that. Ali, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Adam, for such a kind introduction, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Can we go on the next slide, please, Nathan? So in the next 20 minutes or so, I firstly want to situate climate vulnerability and the climate crisis in the context of policing, emergency preparedness and response. Really, the purpose is to draw attention to the urgency and immediacy of this issue, not just for policing, scholarship and research, but also for emergency planners and responders, why it matters, why we need to pay attention, and really why do we need to act now. Secondly, I'll share key findings from the Policing and Community Resilience in the Context of Climate Change project, which Adam mentioned. And just a few acknowledgements just at the very outset. I'm deeply grateful to the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre for funding this work, which explored the role of police and local resilience forums in understanding climate vulnerability and emergency planning and preparedness. And these findings will hopefully help contextualize some of the issues I will discuss in the first half of my talk. I'd like to thank all of the participants who took time out of their really busy diaries to contribute to the project and speak to me. Also, a very quick shout out to Caroline Björnstad, who joined the project as a research assistant during the latter stages, and I'm very grateful for her support with various aspects of the project. And thanks also to Sergeant Rob Simpson and his team for kindly sharing some photos which are included in the slides today. The Winter Storm team are doing incredibly important work in this area, so do check them out. So just in terms of situating my work, the project sits within the broader, wider body of work led by Jared Blaustein on adaptive policing, as well as the ongoing research of my colleague Anna Matczak, whom you'll hear from shortly. So my work focuses fundamentally on understanding climate vulnerability, both from the lens of emergency planners and responders, but also from the lens of marginalized and disenfranchised groups. And as Adam mentioned, I'm also interested in governance and multi-agency work, specifically in relation to networked and polycentric forms of governance, and really understanding how diverse forms of knowledge and experiences of past events shape future adaptive capacity. Next slide, please, Nathan. Definitions of climate vulnerability have evolved significantly. Early conceptualizations by the IPCC were very sort of systematic and quite technical. Vulnerability then was defined as an outcome of measurable components, how the components interact, for instance, what hazards we're exposed to, how sensitive we are to those hazards, and how much capacity we have to adapt. However, as reflected in sort of the more recent IPCC definitions and the work of scholars such as Neil Adger, there has been a significant shift. Climate vulnerability scholarship now recognizes that vulnerability is not just about physical susceptibility to hazards, but it's also about the societal structures and governance arrangements and inequalities that shape how communities and individuals experience and respond to climate hazards. And as the work of many scholars in the field of climate adaptation, including O'Brien and others, has shown that climate vulnerability is fluid, it's contextual, it's not a fixed state, it's not a fixed outcome of physical hazards, but actually it's a dynamic condition and it's continually evolving and changing across social, environmental and institutional landscapes. Next slide, please. So what are the implications then for policing and security? Really, a growing body of evidence shows that the climate crisis is exacerbating pre-existing vulnerabilities. For instance, the work of Islam and Winkle shows the intensification and perpetuation of deprivation and poverty. There are also other social consequences. For example, there's an observed association between high temperatures and heat waves and an increase in intimate partner violence against women and girls. Extreme weather events can also impede women's access to relief and support. And as Van Dalen and colleagues note, extreme weather can exacerbate drivers of violence or create enabling environments for domestic abuse and sexual harassment. And beyond interpersonal violence, cascading effects, so those events that are interconnected, that trigger unpredictability and uncertainty, also pose major challenges for policing and security. So, for instance, there's a growing body of evidence now from the Global South that shows that climate disasters and resource shortages, such as water and food scarcity, are linked to social unrest, disorganization, displacement of populations, and even violent conflict. So for policing and emergency responders, this means they're operating in environments where vulnerabilities multiply and intersect. Next slide, please, Nathan. So let's consider how this plays out then in the UK context. Extreme weather events are now identified as key national risks by His Majesty's government. These are no longer abstract threats. The intensity and severity and frequency of extreme weather events has had real implications for local communities. So, for example, the summer 22 heat waves resulted in over 3,000 excess deaths. In 23-24, the UK experienced more than 14 major storms, causing loss of life, widespread flooding, and severe damage to infrastructure. Earlier this year, in January, we experienced the most powerful windstorm for over a decade, and around 1 million homes were left without power. So when you consider the cascading effects, such as communication failures, transport disruptions, and damaged infrastructure, all of these present significant challenges for police and blue light responders and LRF practitioners and emergency planners. And really a stark example is Storm Arwen in 2021, when LRFs and police were overwhelmed, requiring the deployment of up to 300 military personnel to support emergency response and recovery. So it's not just about responding to a flood or a heat wave. It's about anticipating impacts that can have real consequences for communities and emergency responders. And our understanding of climate vulnerability as contextual and fluid then presents profound challenges, not only for researchers, but also for emergency planners and responders. It really underpins the need for a holistic approach to understanding variations in vulnerability and identifying who might be most vulnerable under different conditions. Next slide, please, Nathan. So a very quick outline of the research design of the project that I've introduced at the start. The study adopted a place-based case study design focusing on a LRF in the north of England, a region that has experienced multiple weather-related emergencies across both urban and rural contexts. The initial work involved a narrative review of literature on adaptive and polycentric governance, climate adaptation, climate vulnerability, and really drawing on the more recent work of colleagues that I mentioned, Jared Blaustein's work on resilience and adaptive policing, and Anna Matczak's and Sylvia Berra's paper on the impacts of the climate crisis for policing and security. The research also undertook a documentary analysis of official reports and reviews into LRFs and landmark inquiries such as the COVID-19 and Grenfell inquiry. And the empirical basis is really the interviews that were conducted with practitioners and emergency planners representing a cross-section of roles, including key strategic leadership roles from the police, council, and fire. One thing I would mention, an approach which is slightly sort of different, was the temporal analogs method that this study deployed. So the interviews and the subsequent sort of thematic analysis deployed this method, which is commonly used in climate adaptation research to examine the impact of climate-related emergencies across space and time. So I found this approach particularly useful for drawing on practitioner experiences of past emergencies and critical incidents. And it really allowed for a rich and nuanced understanding and exploration of issues such as fatigue, and emotional strain experienced by emergency planners and responders. So in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on some key themes emerging from the research over the next couple of slides now. Next slide, please, Nathan. Thank you. In terms of participant understanding of vulnerability, the empirical findings align with our understanding of climate vulnerability being contextual and dynamic. Practitioners repeatedly stressed that vulnerability cannot be reduced to a static list of at-risk groups. As I described earlier, vulnerability is intersectional and is shaped by social, economic, and environmental factors rather than from any single characteristic. But to support sort of rapid deployment of resources and really safeguarding during emergencies, practitioners did acknowledge that lists of vulnerable persons or households can be useful, particularly when based on information shared by multiple partner agencies, so including the police, local councils, and utility companies. So these lists would often include key indicators such as age, disability, and health conditions. And so, for example, in the event of a power cut, for example, individuals who rely on electricity for medical equipment could be prioritized for well-being checks during that initial emergency response. However, participants, especially those from community groups, recognized the limitations of such lists. A lot of participants acknowledged that minoritized communities often experience disadvantage and social exclusion that undermines their ability to cope and adapt during extreme weather conditions. People living in poverty, insecure housing, or with limited mobility also may not feature on lists. Refugees and asylum seekers face additional barriers such as language and social hostility and mistrust of authorities. Women and children are living in conditions of heightened violence or domestic abuse, particularly in rural settings, as the work of Sam Lewis and colleagues has shown. So there's a real risk that some of these groups may be missed during that initial response phase because they will not feature on vulnerability lists, especially if they're not known to emergency services and partner agencies. Practitioners also spoke about the vulnerability of police and emergency responders. So first responders often negotiate extreme weather conditions and they have to negotiate difficult terrain really to check on vulnerable households often to administer first aid or to carry out rescue and recovery activities or to support evacuation efforts. And a lot of the times they do this often without specialized training or equipment. So practitioners noted that emergency responders are also exposed to the same conditions as everybody else, such as extreme heat and cold, and they do face significant physical and emotional fatigue during prolonged and protracted emergency response and recovery efforts, which does raise serious welfare concerns for first responders. So LRFs also then have to then strike a balance between sort of responding to extreme weather events and really managing sort of responder fatigue and then public expectations as well, especially when we think about safeguarding and welfare checks. And this can become even challenging when a yellow or amber weather warning escalates quite quickly into a major incident. Next slide, please, Nathan. And linked to that point, recognizing the variation in practice across England and Wales, and really without understating the work of other blue light services and partner agencies. In this specific case study area, the study found that police play a key role in emergency response activity. Practitioners from across the spectrum emphasized the importance of police leadership, secretariat support, and really the generalist role of policing. Police were recognized as being well positioned to offer 24/7 resource for call handling, first response, and welfare checks, including door knocking. And through their leadership of the strategic and tactical command groups, it was noted that police are better equipped and better skilled often to coordinate activity and hold partners to account. So by taking on that sort of holistic role, police often free up other responders, such as fire, to focus on more specialist tasks during emergencies. And while police, either by default or design, were very willing to absorb non-emergency duties and supplement the capacity of other partner agencies, The analysis does pose a couple of questions, particularly around increased demand and pressure on the police, which has the potential sort of to strain local relationships and disrupt business as usual. But also the public expectations of the police during extreme weather events. It was acknowledged by coal handling staff that regardless of the type of weather emergency, members of the public want the police. Even if there's a tree in the road during a storm, they would usually ask for the police. Another key finding was that actually the local relationships are very strong, and multi-agency work is strengthened by shared experience of past events. A lot of it is down to individuals rather than structures, but practitioners describe themselves as being battle-hardened and having been through the trenches together, which had allowed them to build trust and relational capital over time. And experiences of managing critical incidents and emergency response alongside those informal corridor conversations during LRF program meetings and strategic and tactical command group sessions were described as key factors or enablers for building that mutual trust that then leads to negotiated agreement around that resource sharing and joint decision making. Despite evidence of strong relationships locally, the analysis actually found that partnerships and LRF leadership remain susceptible to institutional and corporate memory loss. So there is a high turnover and lateral movement within policing. And then if you combine that with changes in command structures, that can have an adverse effect on relationships that have been established over a sustained period of time. And finally, the analysis particularly highlighted that while response officers play an important role during an emergency, other specialist units such as rural policing, civil contingencies units, wildlife crime units, and neighborhood policing units, they all play a vital role actually in building partnerships. Their knowledge of local areas, their relationship with partner agencies and community groups, such as farmers, for example, and understanding of neighborhood issues really helps to fill the information gaps around vulnerability in different scenarios and feed into that situational awareness during the initial response phase. But the analysis found that these are often the units that are most at risk of abstraction or lateral movement, especially if other parts of the organization are experiencing high demand. Next slide, please, Nathan. So just finally, really to conclude, these findings and the analysis have wide-ranging implications. The LRFs, at least in principle, represent a whole of society approach to emergency management and disaster response. But there are some questions we need to address, particularly in relation to the capacity of LRFs, the roles and responsibilities of multi-agency partners, and also the role of the police in civil contingencies and emergency preparedness and response. And another question raised by the research is, how do we balance local subsidiarity and that local empowerment with national support? Do we need structural reform, perhaps even a national civil contingencies authority to enable that sort of cross-region collaboration and capability sharing? Can a case be made for a unified emergency response service? So there's a lot of questions, but then there are a lot of positives as well. As you can see, the empirical findings from the study show that temporal analogs, so experiences of climate disasters, extreme weather events, and similar critical incidents and shocks and stresses can help inform future preparedness efforts. And I'm developing a framework now to show how experiences in this region are informing cross-organizational learning. So despite institutional boundaries and constraints, there are signs and examples that partnerships are rising above some of these challenges and demonstrating resilience and adaptive capacity in this space. It is important, though, to recognize that a lot of progress locally is driven by individual efforts. And when we combine this with a sense of common purpose between partner agencies and first responders, findings from this study do give us a great deal of hope when we think about approaches for future preparedness. So do watch this space. Thank you very much.
Great, Ali, thank you so much, and thank you so much for keeping to time as well. So we're going to go straight over to Anna Matczak from the Netherlands. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We can already move on to the next slide, Nathan. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I will start my presentation with a quote from one of the interviews I conducted for the book from, I think, someone who's probably quite well known to most of you in the audience. It's Clifford Sherring, a very renowned policing security scholar. That I like referring to because it reminds me how important this topic is. And although I started working on the topic already 3.5 years ago, the importance of it only is growing. We can move on to the next slide, Nathan, thank you. We know that nothing is going to be the same for all of us because of the accelerating and worsening conditions of our climate. So we should also ask this question to the police, right? How the worsening conditions, effects of climate change will also, or are affecting actually already police services around the world. When I started this journey with a very simple question, the first one, which was basically to investigate a little bit whether there is any discussion within police services, within police organizations about this topic. And to my surprise, I learned that there is some discussion. Maybe I was also very conveniently located in the Netherlands, and I was lucky to interact with the Dutch police, with particular units within the Dutch police, that they were already addressing this question. But now, after some time, I know that also many other services are also asking this question. From there, of course, another question is what it means for police operations, what it means for police practices, for their collaborations. You've already heard a little bit about this from Ali. But what it also means for us criminologists or policing scholars. How do we introduce this topic into our respective fields? And what does it, and when the police are confronted with this question, what do? Do they acknowledge it? Do they adapt, or do they just pretend that they adapt? So that is, I think, where are we now with Ali, with Jared, with many other colleagues as well. And one of the newest questions as a scholar that I'm asking myself right now is what kind of role police can play in broader sustainability transition processes. Next slide, Nathan. Thank you very much. And already the next one. So how I started, how I originated this journey for myself conceptually. About 3.5 years ago, I organized a little workshop in The Hague to pose this question: what are the consequences of climate change on police work? And I invited a number of people, academics, but also practitioners. And I was very positively surprised that some now colleagues from the Dutch police came to this workshop and contributed greatly. The results of that workshop were published as an academic article with my colleague Sylvia Beck, who was at the time also part of this journey process. But that was a very basic, I would say, paper to present the discussion that emerged during the workshop. We organized the findings into 3 levels: the impact of climate change on society, and what does it mean for police in terms of their police job portfolio, then what does it mean for them as an organization, and then what it means for them on an individual basis. So that's what the paper is about. It introduces this kind of very simple 3-level, 3-tier level to organize our thoughts around this topic. But I knew that the paper was not really enough, that there is much more that we can actually say about this, and hence the book, which was published earlier this year over summer. The task for the book was twofold. Was to gather the already existing knowledge on this topic, because there is quite a lot that has been published or discussed in different parts outside of academia that we could actually synthesize and benefit police organizations with. So it was to summarize, analyze, organize this knowledge in a structured, logical way, mainly for police audience, because police organizations are my primary audience for this book, but also then analyze or narrate these findings along 23, in the end, experts whom I interviewed for the book. And these experts, or arranging the interviews and experts themselves, they were quite that was an exercise out of my comfort zone, because they were very few of them were actually criminologists or even policing scholars. Most of them were from other sectors, other professions: epidemiologists, political scientists, military security experts, health experts, people who work for international organizations, and they organize workshops on this topic. And also police officers themselves who are still in the service or left the service, police officers who are pro-climate, but also police officers who are very critical, and I would say remain on the conservative side. So all of these interviews were extremely rewarding. I enjoyed conducting them, but they were, as I said, quite out of my comfort zone. And the book is structured to present 7 themes that we, at this stage of knowledge, we know that the police organizations can benefit from. So the first one is about the changing landscape of crimes and harms, because one of the first questions that I notice police always ask is how what you're talking about will change what I have to investigate, what forms my job portfolio, what does it mean for us, how the law will change. And we know that if you ask a question about my job, it's also automatically a question about law changes. The second theme is about quite well-researched area of the impact of higher temperatures or heat waves on us, on crime rates, on our propensity to violence. That's the section that documents this. However, there is a limitation there, because we still work with the assumption that it will always and continuously be about heat waves, but there is also an emerging scholarship about the potential of the other effect, the increasing cold waves, for example, in case of the collapse of so-called amok current. The third theme is about policing civil disobedience, and if there is any attention given in criminology to any of these issues, it's this one. But I present it as just one part of a bigger picture, along with some other questions that I asked that we also need to look into. Civil unrest that comes from farmers, not only activists. Then there is a section of policing disasters or climate crisis, and I think that's where Ali's and Jared's work fit in as well. The next one is about the impact of climate change on police organizations, the emergence of sustainability units, the introduction of sustainability policies within police, the emergence of environmental crime units, and what does it mean for the police. Then the next one is a section on resilience and adaptive policing that was already mentioned by Ali. We know that the police have been reformed continuously, and there have been multiple models trying to suggest how the police can improve their work. We know models such as intelligence-led policing, community policing, problem-solving policing, and resilience and adaptive policing is the most recent kind of orientation for the police, how to address wicked problems that also include climate change. There is a caveat here, because quite often when I introduce this topic outside, again, my usual audience, I hear that police is not really a learning organization, and it's pointless to talk about this because they will never really recognize this. And I challenge this, because if you talk about resilience, if you talk about adaptive capacity, you really also have to acknowledge that there is a learning potential or learning capacity within any organization, including the police. And I think Jared Blaustein makes also a strong case for this. And then the final one focus on individual police officers, and I was very happy to hear also more of this now in Ali's presentation about individual police officers' responses, their emotional responses to this topic as well. I think it's very important to have more scholarship on this topic. So at the end of the book, I propose a concept of eco-cops. So that was not my original idea. I quoted another scholar from one of the African countries who first introduced this idea. Where are they? Who are they? What are they doing to popularize the topic of climate change within their services? So they do exist. I've met many of them, but as also Ali acknowledged, these are eco-champions. The process of introducing the question of climate change into a police service is carried on shoulders of individual people at the cost of their private time and emotional burden, etc. But I also try to include some other ideas in terms of what kind of conditions we need to create for eco-cops to flourish in those organizations. So that's the book. Next slide, Nathan. Thank you very much. And next slide. When it comes to my own conceptual standing, my positionality, I decided to choose something that gave me a bit of a room for maneuver in terms of analyzing what we might think about police capacity to address these issues. Next slide, thank you, Nathan. And at the time, I read a number of interesting papers and a collection of articles in one special edition that introduced the concept of climatization. In other words, simple terms is how do you introduce a question of climate change into your organization? It's not only for the police, it can be for health services, for universities, business entities, corporations, etc. So that the concept of climatization comes from climate governance. There's plenty of literature on this. But why I like this concept at that time was that it helps you follow that particular organization's own drivers and dynamics and setbacks without already saying that, okay, this police organization will adapt or will do okay, or they will acknowledge this question. Because as we know also from the literature on this, is that this is not a linear process. It comes with trade-offs, it comes with setbacks, it comes with polarization and with resistance that quite often very quick and popular techno fixes are introduced. So that framework felt a bit more appropriate at the time to follow and to apply. Next slide, please. And what it means for policing and how this network also felt right and matching at the time was because what I've noticed now over the years, but also in case of the Netherlands, is that climate change is introduced as something that is unlabeled, is quite often institutionally not yet recognized. It doesn't feature in our official documents. That's actually not the case of the Netherlands, but in other countries. So it's implicit, and it's again done by individuals located in different parts of the force. And another interesting aspect of this particular framework was that it constitutes an alternative to quite dominant narrative about securitization. So introducing climate change as a security issue, as a threat multiplier. And maybe there's nothing particularly bad about this. I also talk about this in the book a little bit, that we can learn something from this part of scholarship and practice and narrative. However, police is a different force. Police is about also public safety. It's about community. So should find their own language, that it will not be so securitized. So hence my approach and the main narrative of the book. Next slide, please. But in my most recent work, that is kind of a follow-up to the book, was an examination of a very interesting unit within the Dutch police, and that's also that was a source of inspiration for me to continue on this scholarly path. Which is the sustainability and now also environmental safety unit. When I met my colleagues from that unit at the time, that was only sustainability, and their mandate was rather, I would say, narrow. It was to introduce sustainability into the police force, but in a very basic form. So how we can green our fleet, how we can make our housing more sustainable, how we can comply with sustainable goals, etc. But it was already felt that the appetite for something bigger, more ambitious was already brewing. And over the years, I learned that the unit, of course, expanded, and they have a bigger mandate. They've also are engaged in research activities, but there was also an informal network within the Dutch police that led the discourse on sustainability and climate change. And thanks to those two kind of forces, the formal institutionalized one and the not so formal network, sustainability is now one of the key strategic themes or objectives of the Dutch police. So they have a lot of achievements on their portfolio. And Jared and I, we wrote a paper about this particular unit, the development of that unit and their achievements, but also potential pitfalls and limitations that is currently under review. That paper also now merges a little bit my first original initial conceptualization, meaning how we introduced the question of climate change, how we can track climatization within the police force, with Jared's and Ali's idea also about adaptive policing, where where you can observe how a nurturing environment, policing environment, can actually help and assist, facilitate a bigger ambition for the police, and also to harness those eco-cop mindset. Next slide, please. And the next slide, and the next slide. I'm just being mindful of the time. So what is currently occupying me again, and what is kind of a follow-up of the book to some extent, are the following questions. The first question is about the role of the police in sustainable transition processes, how they can position themselves into that kind of web of interactions, but more specifically, how their job is changing because of new types of crimes or new methods of committing old and well-known crimes. And a good example of something that maybe it's not yet on police radar, but it will be increasingly, is the illicit trade of F-gases. If you are not familiar with this term, F-gases, they are synthetic fluorinated gases that are used in cooling equipments, such as air conditioning equipment, in cars, at homes. Predominantly, that's their main use. And since the moment when the EU has been trying to phase them out, because they are very potent, they are very harmful, much more than CO2, of course, immediately we observed the emerging black market and illegal trafficking of these F-gases from outside of Europe to Europe, mainly from China. Some of the people we talked to, because this research is conducted with a junior researcher, Zareen Hussain, is that the profit you can make out of this crime is comparable now to drug trafficking. So some police services already are aware of this issue and they are involved, but in some countries this issue is dealt with by administrative or regulatory actors. But we use this case, Zareen is conducting crime script analysis of this particular crime to illustrate a bigger picture of how sustainability transitions, again, are not linear. They also create opportunities for crimes, for harms. And this is an example of this kind of crime and harm, a crime of the future, which is not really that much in the future. It's already happening as we speak. But that's something that might occupy also police organizations soon. And the other question that I have, that I'm working on right now, is this idea of an eco-cop and how we can conceptualize it, how we can maybe measure it, how we can explore this idea. Who are they? Again, I've been quite lucky, and I've had a very good and inspiring collaboration with the Dutch police, or with particular units and people within the Dutch police. But now I'm, of course, opening up to other countries and their police services to explore whether we can see something similar somewhere else and how it works elsewhere. So we know that there is a push to set up environmental crime units. So there is a bit of a green organizational reset, especially in EU countries, due to the revised environmental crime directive, etc. There is more awareness about climate change because of climate demonstrations. But how does this all impact individual police officers' attitudes? Do they become more pro-climate, or actually does this polarize them even more? So that is what I'm trying to figure out right now through my additional research. We know that those eco-cops cannot work in silos. They cannot work on their own. They need to work with others. And this multi-agency aspect is more prominent than ever. We know that policing is done by many actors. Police is just one of them. But now this is really a shared whole of a society approach more than before. Okay, and I think that was everything that I wanted to say. I'm not sure whether I've managed to stick to my time. I know that Adam was very strict about this, so I was also constantly looking at my time, but I think we have some time for questions. Maybe just one thing that I also forgot to mention while addressing the need and the importance of multi-agency collaboration. I wanted again to finish on a bit more positive note with a picture from an event that I organized last year called the Hague Roundtable of Climate and Security. I co-organized it with a number of actors in The Hague. But what was quite special about this, and many people commented on this after, is that we had very different people at the table, people who normally don't talk with each other, they don't meet in the same settings. We had police, we had students, young people who go to demonstrations, we had military experts, we had diplomats, we had representatives from academia, NGOs, etc. And the discussions were very emotional, very difficult at some point, but I'm very happy that we managed to organize such an event. So as much as it is a difficult topic sometimes to discuss when the police are at the table, I think we have to continue. So on that note, I will finish, and I hope that we have some interesting questions to follow up on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. We do have some time, so let me encourage colleagues to post their questions on the Q&A function. But let me start off, Anna and Ali. So one thing that you both touched on, and it's a kind of a puzzle, and I'll just get your reflections on. And I'll start with you, Anna, which is that because you mentioned explicitly about the impact on policing organisation as an organisation. And one thing we know about policing is policing tends to be good at responding to things that happen and responding quickly. They are, after all, a response service in that. And yet, organisationally and culturally, you mentioned the organisational issues, but I suppose what I'm kind of pushing you towards is a little bit also the cultural issues about how the future horizon, some of that future thinking gets pulled into policing when policing is so caught up with the day, with responding to whatever crisis or whatever incidents happened, and that shift culturally as well as organisationally that it's going to take. And you suggested there's some kind of green shoots of possibility in terms of the adaptive capacity of policing as an organisation. But I wonder if you just might reflect a little bit more about how we shift the dial on an organisation which is largely responsive to being something which is much more about foresight, much more about thinking, not just 1 year, 5 years down the line, but even further in terms of the skills, the knowledge, the needs that the organisation has to pull in, and as you also implied, the kind of what that implies for partnership working, not just the police doing it alone. So there's quite a lot in there, but maybe Anna and then Ali, if you'd like to just reflect on that first off.
Thank you, Adam. This is an excellent question. I'm not sure I have a good answer because I kind of also asked this question I discussed this question in the book a little bit, and I rely on some answers from some of the interviewees as well. But what I do know, and maybe I will base my answer on what I've seen in the Netherlands, is that the Dutch police are asking themselves the same kind of question. So I participated in a number of meetings with them of different nature, and they do ask themselves this question that we want to be a relevant, a future-proof organization. This is what we are proposing. This is what we're seeing. We don't want this to be short-term We want to be relevant for society. We want to be a legitimate organization. We want to be on the right side of the history. We want to be an attractive employer for young people. So that these are the comments that I've been hearing in the Netherlands, right? From, of course, a certain fraction of police officers. They know the struggles, they know how things are, but I think that the people I've talked to, they are quite motivated and they want to see a long-term transformation. The Sustainability Environmental Safety Unit, they have their own strategy, which is well, yeah, the strategy is one thing, but also how they go about the strategy is to take baby steps and incremental steps towards a long-term, maybe cultural shift. This is also why sometimes this unit of people who work in the unit are called as, you know, dreamers, believers, the woke unit, all sorts of, but in a good way, in a positive way, but still. So, but that they are in the organization, very close to police leadership. In fact, they have a lot of support from the police leadership. So I think there is a bit of a momentum for something that is not reactive, but something that is more proactive and long term. But how I want to finish this answer is something that I think Rob White said in a conversation about this topic, is that even if you have, let's say, in one country, a police organization that is, let's say, on a trajectory for a little bit of a cultural shift, it doesn't mean that they will not get frustrated. It doesn't mean that this will not change. It's not a linear process. I mean, we all are observing the rise of authoritarian ways of going about governing, so that, you know, at any moment, I mean, this would a police organization is building can be lost, can be impeded. So yes, I think this is a very important question, and and thank you for asking this. I'm not sure I have a good answer. I think I'm full of hope, and as I said, I think that's because where I'm located and the interactions with police practitioners that I've had so far, that they are, you know, they are aware of what their organization is like, what are the limitations, but nonetheless they keep doing what they're doing.
Great. Ali, do you want to get brief response from you?
Very quickly, thank you for that question. So yeah, you know, individuals are driving these efforts to sort of change that culture internally, but also I think we've got a role to play as researchers, and really we need to move away from hypothetical scenarios and what Neil Ledger calls actionable information, and police like that. So we want to ground some of the issues around the climate crisis and those issues that might affect, people might think that they'll affect policing in the future, but actually they're affecting police right now, and we need to really highlight police leaders' attention to those issues that are affecting the police right now, and then hopefully start from there.
Great. So I'm going to put a couple of questions, because we've got some questions coming in from the audience. So the first of them, and you can both provide some responses if you have them. So the first is from Bamba from the European Forum for Urban Security, who says that as climate vulnerabilities increase, how should local authorities be integrated in policing and emergency response structures to ensure a coherent and multi-actor approach to resilience? So that's the first question. The second one, which is kind of connected, which is how do we better equip blue light responders, both in terms of training and equipment? So two related sets of questions, and that's from Mick Kate. So who wants to go first? Anna.
I was going to suggest maybe Ali, because I think that these questions are more into Ali's domain. I have one idea for the first question, but I will let Ali answer, and then maybe I will follow up on this.
Yeah, I mean, in response to the first question around sort of the involvement of local structures, in England and Wales, we do have that statutory partnership with local resilience forums. So local authorities are already embedded, at least when we think about legislation. But when it comes to practice, you know, the situation is completely different. They lack capacity and resource and capability, and then because of austerity and because of sort of the, you know, the decrease in numbers that we've had over the years in our public services, a lot of that sort of reliance and ends up on the police. So police are expected to then pick up on a lot of the tasks. So there is a statutory role for local authorities, but we really need to think about how they're supported and what professional analytical support they need to be able to play a meaningful role in emergency planning. Second question, yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it, with equipment. Police need to work in partnership with researchers and academics and collaborators really from the private industry to really think about what challenges police officers are facing. I think our responsibility, first of all, is really to highlight the welfare issues that first responders face, and then really build on that evidence base. And then hopefully that evidence base can then inform a collaborative piece of work, which can then sort of address some of these issues around lack of training or poor equipment. My research has really been, some of the participants were really, passionate about this issue. The rest cycles, the breaks that responders need, access to food and water, during a protracted crisis. So all of these things are really things that we should be thinking about right now.
Just to follow up on this very quickly, on the first question about how to integrate climate vulnerabilities into local landscapes, and also what's the role of local authorities in this. I think it depends on how the policing landscape looks like in each country. In France, in the Netherlands, local authorities do play an active role in shaping the policing realm, right? I mean, they, in some cases, they even are active policing actors. So in that sense, I think maybe the distance is shorter and it's easier to find each other in the web of different connections. But in some countries, the distance is quite far. So I think it depends on the structure and the local, national, context-specific landscape of policing configuration. But I think Ali also mentioned this in his presentation about coordination, how coordination is important. And I want to emphasize this again. I think we really don't highlight this enough, how important are the brokers, the coordinators between those different, not only institutions and actors, but also cultural environments, that they speak with their different lingo. They are trained sometimes differently. They have different strategic objectives. So the role of these people that can connect them, who can translate one institutional language to another and quickly react, is just absolutely vital in this day and age.
Great. Listen, I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious of finishing on time. There are other questions, but maybe we can pick those up outside of this. But listen, colleagues, I think we've heard two great presentations for two wonderful scholars who are clearly doing really important work in this field, and who I'm sure we're going to hear more about in the future. Thank you, Anna and Ali, for joining us today. Thanks for your connections with the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. Just let me also say, do keep in touch with the Vulnerability and Policing Futures Research Centre. We've got future webinars. Do let me also encourage you to get hold of Anna's book and have a read of it, and do get hold of the work that Ali's been publishing as well. Otherwise, just let me say thank you for joining us. Thank you to Anna and Ali, and thank you for Nathan for supporting the presentation. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you.